Ṣẹ̀kẹ̀rẹ̀ lọ bá jó, ṣẹ̀kẹ̀rẹ̀ lọ bá jó, olúwa mi ò dìde ojú ṣẹ̀kẹ̀rẹ̀.
Hello, and welcome to the Ashen Forge. I am Phantom X, joined as always by the legendary Neurotoxin and Diggs. Hello, gentlemen. How are you?
Doing great. How are you doing?
Not too bad.
Great.
Diggs, great.
I've been dancing again, but I've also been still reading this series, this lit RPG series called Darkthorn Academy. So I think I'm on book 5. That's a lot of fun. It is distracting me from playing as well, Neuro. So reading and dancing.
Reading and dancing. Yep. Well, you know, it happens. I mean, I get you on the reading. I've got sitting next to me the latest D&D book, and seeing the different changes they did with the races to streamline them so that they're kind of like PHB, DMG streamlined, and they aren't all existing in all these other outside lores. So they've made basic rule compatible versions of tons of creatures, all the different races, not all of them, excuse me, all of the ones that they wanted to change up and accommodate and kind of take from all the different places where they're at, where they aren't just setting specific.
What's the name of that one?
That one's the Monsters of the Multiverse.
Oh, right. Okay. I think I remember seeing that. I'll check it out.
There's a little bit more to the title, but one of those words is definitely a copyrighted phrase, so I'm not going to say it.
That's fine.
I will just say Morty, not with the T.
I love reading. I have every R.A. Salvatore book. I have all of the. I have anything you can think of. All the Tor, main novels. But now anymore, I try to sit down and read. I fall asleep. I don't know.
Yeah. Well,
Great.
like
It's awesome that you have some material that can just put you to sleep like that. Not everybody has
literally,
that.
it's a clock. 5 minutes. That's all I got.
Nice.
Well, this series, the Darkthorn theories, the Darkthorn Academy gives me lots of theories about how I want to play, Ashes. So it's fun.
Well, speaking of which, we have a few things to kind of go over. I think Neuro, you'll kind of start us off with some talk about server separation. And Diggs, you had some interesting ideas on helping goblins or some other things that we'll get into as well. So let's begin.
So I think one of the things that maybe gets a little bit overlooked or isn't as well emphasized, perhaps maybe not even as well understood, is something, and by that I mean understood both by us and exactly by the development team and what they're going to do with it. But there's kind of two things when people talk about the differences on each server and how that makes it different from a theme park. Well, that only goes so far, because part of that is, yes, every server can potentially have every permutation occur of what race is dominant in what node that tiers up to the metropolis and what type it is and who their vassals are and what combinations of benefits you get from all of that. And, all the different sorts of things that they're going to have to account for, but they're going to be things that are soft enough to mesh together rather than these like sitting down like, if this, and this happens, it has to be this. But if this, and then that happens, it has to be this. They're not going to sit down and like write out every permutation like a madman or something. It's going to be, this series of events can occur, and that kind of meshes with this series of events that can occur. Some of them might be themed differently, but occur in similar ways. Some might be completely different and occur in completely different ways. But I think that's the part that It's just the surface level, like these games are going to have different, or this game is going to have different servers, and they're going to be dynamically different in a way that matters. It isn't just what factions in control of what territory, or which one's the server that has the big Zerg guild on it that has the giant streamer that's associated with it, or the big former Eve group or whatever, and their people, what server they're rolling on. Aside from that sort of stuff, I think one of the things that's going to be the big defining factor and what makes a server different from the other ones is actual differentiating plots and differentiating events. The idea that you can succeed some events really well, you can barely squeak by and prevent something catastrophic, but you still get kind of burnt in the process a little. It could be something completely catastrophic happens and I have to live with the consequences. These can occur in different ways and manifest in different ways, and they change the servers in different ways. It wouldn't be something where every server has the same events. It isn't that you're not gonna start off and do some questing and beat some things up and finally find out that this dragon named Phoenixia has been in the Aelin court this entire time and has been screwing things up, and then when you go to make the thing and you go finally defeat this dragon, now you're fighting the next one, Farkwing, whose key you've unlocked by defeating Phoenixia, et cetera, et cetera. I'm just making statements on vanilla WoW there, but that the idea that those things are always going to happen on a WoW server is because that's what's curated to happen. There is no other way. The fun forage in the desert isn't gonna not open. That's always going to open. It's just how quickly do players open it. There might be some small things that have gone here and there differently on servers in games over the years, things that weren't actually player initiated but lore based sort of things. But I imagine they were few and far between. This isn't meant to be like that. Anybody noticing the shirt that I'm wearing might know the connection between Telestin as the world in which Revival existed. And that's kind of the thing I've been thinking about recently, is comparing Ashes of Creation to the Revival Gold server, where it isn't just, here's the world and we're just going to keep throwing more content at it. But the Gold server was the subscription-based one, where it actually had active DMs with their active hands, DMs, GMs, whatever you want to call them, in the game world, and not in a creepy way like Ultima Online, but instead that they're the top tier staff lore people that are going in and doing and enacting and playing these things that you might not realize you're walking next to one of the gods, and they're just playing you along. You're following, you're doing the thing, and all of a sudden you're a part of some big major thing that's going to change the outcome of the server. That's not the sort of thing that you usually see in MMOs, and it's because it's really expensive and really difficult to do. But I think that's a little bit closer to what Ashes of Creation kind of wants to and perhaps needs to do here, is that we're looking at what the players are doing, how they're doing it, what things they achieve, how fast they achieve them, how many times they fail, all of that sort of stuff. Different things they don't address that scale up, that get worse and worse and worse, and do world-altering things. That wolf you didn't kill, 3 years ago somehow is now the super apex god wolf, and now it's coming back to destroy every village that ever hunted wolves, which is all of them, except the ones where wolves don't exist, which it doesn't care about. So, that's the level of consequence, closer to something you would have in a tabletop game, but it needs to work with a soft enough set of rules and a large scale set of players that it can work on the MMO scale. So I'm going to kind of stop talking for a little bit because I've taken up a lot of time here, and I'm sure both of you guys have a lot of thoughts on everything I just said there.
We got a neuro rant. That was awesome.
Well, separate servers histories is like a dream, right? So I've always said I love EVE Online. You know, I hate the game. I don't play it. It's not my style. It's not anything. Nothing relates to me. Although I guess it's spreadsheet based. That might, but you know, I used to have a subscription to PC Gamer, and you had all of these articles, right? Not all, but occasionally you'd have articles about things that are occurring in EVE Online, the real people, the guilds, or whatever they call them, the intrigue, the fighting. That doesn't exist in a fantasy world, and so that is my hope here: is these server differences, how it does take into account all of these different changes, you know, the racial makeup of the node, you know, the all of the little things that add up. My only, you know, I've been spending a lot of time in the wiki. My biggest question with this is, I'm curious how separate each server will feel, because, you know, we know that this isn't sandbox. This is sort of a combination sandbox theme park. Steven has even said there's that great quote that he has that, you know, it's a cop out. Sandbox games are a cop out because, you know, you need a reason to open the door and go through it. So, you know, I read about, gosh, they talk about like the first storyline phase. So clearly there's an overarching sort of story. So I guess my biggest question at this point is how individualized do you actually feel, as opposed to the overall story that everyone experiences, right? So is it going to feel so different that truly each server, you know, really does feel different? Or are there just these sort of smaller, you know, I guess a real world example now that WoW has, you know, the leveling system where every level just sort of scales to you, where I decided to go to Loch Modan versus, you know, to some other zone to level, like is it that level of difference, or does it truly feel different? Is my biggest question with this. There's a lot of little ones too.
Yeah, some of what I think of though, well, that makes it fascinating and different in different ways is so the different buildings that we choose to construct in each node impacts what's available in the world, and the racial population that's controlling that each node is going to make a difference. And so one of the things that I hope for, you know, when I talk about RP in MMORPGs, I'm really just talking about playing the game from the perspective of your character and talking about the game from the perspective of your character rather than the perspective of the player as much as possible. So you minimize talking about football or basketball or um, real life trials that might be happening, and you focus on what's going on in the game. And that makes it easy in Ashes, because in these other games that we play, everything is static. We're all doing exactly the same quests. All the cities are going to be there forever. But in Ashes, if you're gone for a month, when you come back, the same cities might not be there. You'll have different mayors, you'll have different monarchs, and you're going to want to know what just happens. Like when I was here last
You might have
time,
lost your freehold in a siege.
yeah, everything. Like it was like this last time, and now it's not. And where do I go to find this? And that's going to be obviously different for each server because we have different populations. Period. But then, like I said, the different buildings that we build um, impact what mobs and recipes become available. So all of that's going to be somewhat different on each server. Like um, Phantom, you asked in chat what happens if there's no scientific node. And there will be scientific nodes, but there might not be a scientific metro. One of the things I think about is, you know, what if everybody or most of the people on your server want no fast travel at all? So they're working to make sure there's no scientific metro. And then that's what siegers are for. If you really want fast travel somewhere, you siege one of those metros and try and get a scientific node to become metro so that you can get fast travel. And those are the kinds of things that we'll be looking for, because it might be that people want to have not just one military metro on the server, they want two. And there's only 5 servers and there's 4 types of nodes. So if you want, more than one type of metro, you're going to have to kind of fight for that. And that's going to be interesting to see. That's probably going to be different on each server. One of the things that came to mind when Neuro was talking about the concept server variance is, that's why transferring your character from one server to another, I don't know how they're going to deal with that in terms of server merges, but it becomes problematic, because if you go onto a server where you helped kill Phoenixia, and when you get to the new server, Phoenixia has never appeared and is not a thing yet, how do you have this armor from this defeated dragon that never existed on?
Well, if it's legendary, I think
the way they currently reconcile that is it would just be left behind on the server, and you wouldn't get to bring it with you. But I don't even know if server transfers should be a thing.
That's my
the only way I could see a server transfer thing being okay is if, in doing server merges, they give people the option to kind of take a different branch with history and keep playing out. I don't know. It seems complicated. It's one of those reasons why they're going to need to make sure the game's really good, and they don't make too many servers, but have enough to support the population, but then don't have too many. So, as population declines, unless they're able to keep people engaged. That's the thing. This is going to be one of the difficult parts about the game, is that it is going to have to keep a lot of its player base, and it's going to have to continue bringing in new players. It's got to be a very successful game, or it isn't going to work.
I keep thinking, hold on, real quick, I just think one answer to that is having an event where the world is destroyed and then remade, like the Phoenix, it's remade, and so everybody on there is on a different world, and they understand it from a multiversal concept that, you're basically starting this new world from scratch. And maybe you get to bring some of your stuff, but, it's because your world was destroyed and here's a new one. But I don't know what they'll do.
So here was my reason for my comment about a scientific node, is because something I think is wonderful is that they're going to track the server history. So as you start to roll a new character, you'll be able to look server to server and see kind of what's been done by who, and get an idea of, I guess, what kind of activity that server is like. Are there a lot of sieges? Are there not? That sort of thing. However, the reason I mention that is because that is tied to a node with a library. A library is a stage 3 node of a scientific node. So conceivably, you could have a server that doesn't have a scientific node. Then what do you do with the server history? Like, then how do you present that to the player? They still could. I understand that, but that was my. It seemed odd to be tied to a library, but.
Yeah, that aspect.
Oral lore and tradition. You just have storytellers in the world.
But
they do have scribes.
It seems strange to me anyway, because we're supposed to be able to figure that out before we join the server. So if it's only available from a library, that means that we have to go into each server somehow and make it to the library, and then so that can't really be how we're getting our information about which server we want to join.
That's just how they've presented it, that it's tracked visible to players in a node's library.
Yeah,
so.
That is a possible thing, but I'm just saying we have to be able to know that history of which we're going to join.
You can be a scribe, and I want to know how you sign up to do that, because that sounds like a lot of fun. Now, if that takes away a profession, hell no, but we're already limited. It could.
Yeah, I got you. I understand what you mean.
Because I assume they're not going to let anyone be scribes for the server history. So you're going to have to do probably some questing or something.
Yeah.
somehow to be able to get the ability to do that.
And cartography would be cool. I don't know how they can do that, but I'm looking forward to seeing if they can somehow do cartography in the game. But you had another question, didn't you? You had a second question in chat that seemed interesting. What was it? Will our individual narratives really make the world feel different?
Yeah, that's kind of what I talked about. I mean, there's a lot of talk about your race, seasonal stuff. You know, there can be like Thieves Guild. There's a lot of little individualities there, but I just wonder how much that actually feels like it plays into the world versus doing dailies or something like that.
Well, maybe that leads into my question. You know, Phantom last time, not Phantom, Neuro last time mentioned being lawful evil, and the thing that triggered that I'd forgotten at the end of the show was whether or not we can support these, like the Goblin faction. When there's an event with the goblins rising to attack some city, would we have the ability to find a goblin faction that we can befriend? Neuro and I did that in D&D game we were playing. We ended up befriending the goblins instead of killing them.
We staged a coup and brainwashed the person that we then installed as the leader. So yeah, but that did happen. Definitely did happen.
And so yeah, I think it would be great, you know, if these reputations that we're building with different factions actually mean something, and you know, especially if we can help some of these factions. I mean, it's nice kind of to have enemies and NPCs to always be enemies, but diplomacy would be nice as well sometimes.
Well,
like
the circumstance you give is also kind of a funny one. You were saying enemies that are going to or creatures that are going to attack a town, and immediately I'm thinking, well, what you're going to do then is coordinate with the goblins that you attack from one side and they attack from the other side, and that way you can definitely level that place, but then you don't tell them afterward that you're going to kill all of them.
Yeah, well, it makes me wonder too if that means that,
or share it with them, have them move in.
I was going to say, does that mean that if we do that, we could have goblins as our mercenaries who are guarding our caravans, or goblins who are mercenaries for our freeholds while we're away? I mean, that could make servers very different.
Well,
oh yeah.
I mean, how would they do that though, right? So if you're fighting with the goblins, you would get corruption, right? So
No, not if it's a siege. You don't
not if
get
it's an
corruption
event.
during a siege.
Yeah.
but why would? Well, I guess that would be a PvE
If you
siege.
launch a siege and they launch their own NPC attack at the same time, you wouldn't be getting corruption for it. Maybe the people who coordinated the thing would, but
Now that would be interesting. So you could you could gain faction with other groups and sort of hire them, or somehow do a quest line to get them to attack at the same time as you. That would be interesting. Maybe you could even put the monster coin to use, become one of them.
Yeah, there's no corruption during any events. So even if it's just a goblin event, it's not actually a siege, whatever it is. There's no corruption during those events. So
But if it doesn't change the overall story, does that change your desire to do that?
But I think it should change the story, like I said. So one, I think it would probably have to be a specific faction of goblins, so it might not actually be the exact same faction that's attacking the city. And I don't know how many different factions of goblins they might want. But hopefully there are different factions, and it's not all just, all goblins are antagonists. But like I said, if the goblins are successful in whatever their endeavor it is, maybe that makes it so that it opens up to be possible to hire goblins as your mercenaries. And I don't know, that'd be a significant change for me. That'd be fun to play on a server where I've got goblins walking around on my freehold helping me out.
So you're almost having a Sims experience. Right? I was telling them where to go, how to fight, and because the monster coin that doesn't change anything, right? That's just sort of a fun event, essentially.
I mean, they can knock out your buildings and you have to reconstruct them and stuff. And I would imagine that would end up having some kind of story, depending on whether they win or lose. I would think that.
Yeah. I wonder if there's going to be limitations, like can you just pop it at 2 a.m. when everybody's away and, you know, hit them while their pants are down? Or are you going to have to do it during certain times of the day, like the sieges?
Monster coins are events, so you spend those during actual events. You can't just do it anytime.
You can't just do it anytime. Gotcha.
Yeah.
See, I get a really distinct feeling, though, again, spending a lot of time on the wiki, you know, there's a lot of conversation about dark, good versus evil, dark, bad. And, you know, they've made concessions. Yes, you can do quests that are sort of opposite, I guess, of what most people will. So you could do quests for the others or something like that in that religion. But again, if it doesn't really alter, that's that question I have is like, does your personal experience actually feel like it somehow is contributing to the overall change of the node of the server? Because if I'm given a quest and it's an awesome quest and I go and, you know, ultimately do something for the others, but it doesn't really end with anything, like it doesn't change any outcomes, like what, you know, I guess it could still be fun, but, you know, within what we're told, I just get this really strong sense that while we'll be able to pursue that to a degree, it probably won't have much impact on things like node development, overall story arcs, narratives, things like that.
But it should.
Maybe.
Yeah, I mean, which quests are available depends on, you know, again, which buildings are built and, you know, which server, I mean, which nodes are making it to become a city and which nodes are making it to become a metro. Again, you want some quests you won't be able to get for your race if you don't have that race controlling a metro. So
it could be that one person learned some recipe that nobody else on the server has because they did some quest and they don't realize immediately that this thing is a linchpin to other crafting and other materials and such. And so they maybe haven't been given the opportunity or the resources to make a bunch of it. And so they don't even really use it much. They can make it, you know, they don't know what to do with it. They don't really tell anybody about it until, you know, somewhere way down the road when somebody's like, hey, you know, didn't you say you can make blah, blah, blah stuff? That stuff's really important for this and that. It's like, oh, really? I just figured everyone was making it. No.
Yeah,
no.
the hierarchy of religions should make an impact.
Yeah.
Which one is
if you
on
just
top?
if everybody worships the goddess of creation and nobody decides to worship anybody else, then it's probably going to be an interesting sort of server.
Well, more importantly, if you're worshiping the god of fate and you want that to be the dominant religion, you got to take down the religion for creation a notch or two in order to get what you need. That's part of what drives that PvP. One of the things I was thinking of, reminded of this morning was EverQuest Next had this ability called Unsummon, and I was like, oh, I want to be the strongest at unsummoning, so that I'm the master of unsummoning on that world. And I kind of have that same idea for Ashes. If there was an ability that we could get, and maybe that would come from one of the Scholars Academies instead of from an actual class, or, you know, in some mage school, I could learn how to unsummon other people's summons. That would be awesome. So yeah, what becomes available through these Scholars Academies, and what can you do with the Thieves Guild and all of that stuff. That should provide quite a bit of impact to each servers.
I mean, I would see that. I would think that could. My previous comments were more on the sort of evil side. That it seems like, because I'm also trying to wrap my head about the complexity of how do you prepare for that, the endless possibilities. Like we keep talking about goblins, but what if the server took a trajectory to where it's not goblins, it's some other humanoid creature that you can go be like, how do you put that into a code base is just crazy to think about.
You just create the conditions for it. And don't tell the players so they don't know why it was one thing or the other to ruin the mystery. If the difference between it being goblins or kobolds or gnolls or something else there was literally a die roll when that node reached tier 5 for the first time with those people as the owners of it or whatever, well, it was just a die roll. But you didn't know that. You couldn't know that unless they tell you. And I think that's part of the magic. That's when you're playing a tabletop game. That's why there's a screen in front of the person hosting and running the game. Because you can't see their die rolls. You can't see their information. You don't know what you don't know, what hasn't been told to you, and what can't be implied by the rules and what's already been provided. So that's... they don't need to reveal the mystery. I think that's part of the thing that's nice. They can do things that seem seemingly random or seemingly by design and intended, and just so long as it's something that's an entertaining piece of content, it doesn't really matter either way how it was chosen. It could have been someone was like, hey, I see that node is coming up in the world, and I'm one of the people who works on the project, and maybe I'm gonna have it do something or whatever, because my job is to look at those things and make decisions about these things.
Because I want completing a quest for the others to feel just as important as if I failed a storyline quest for any other race. And can't repeat it. That's what I would like.
I think I had this idea for EQ Next, but it would be equally nice for events on for Ashes. I was hoping for a Hell server where you just let every event, like the goblin attacks, you just let those, we fail them and let them win, and then see what the world looks like afterwards. What happens if we fail every event, or at least make it to a place so that the goblins are winning every time, and maybe they take over but don't destroy the city. What does that world look like? They
will have to run simulations. I can't imagine once this is in place they won't do that. Just out of even curiosity to see, okay, what's the end point? Like, at what point does it break and why? Mm-hmm. That would be fun to watch. I mean, if they could somehow live stream that in a way that was sped up and somehow visually made sense, I would watch that. That would be a lot. It's like the Smedley's game where it generates an entire server
Hero song,
server history. Now it's a local server, but it generates the whole server history. I don't know if either of you actually spent time reading through some of those things. There's not a lot of details because the game never really made it past early access, but
there is a history of all the different things that go on, and who beats who, and who enslaves who, and who merges with who, and who's gone from the world now, and who maybe reemerged, and this and that, and the who's like who, and the who doesn't like who, and just as it shifts and changes over the ages, and then you get plopped down in a world where a bunch of stuff has happened.
Mm-hmm.
Could be fun.
Yeah.
Could be fun to watch.
Yeah. Yeah, it would be nice to see. It would be fun, rather, to see what sort of things the simulations come up with. Would it be nice? Maybe not, because I also worry about, again, the more you reveal, the less magical it seems. And so to know all of that and see all of that, now people are thinking, well, now I know this stuff, and so I'm going to play the game this way rather than just playing and enjoying the game for what it is and not basing it on some prior knowledge and explanation of things that, they could have otherwise skipped.
Yeah, but it might be hard to get 10,000 people to do what you want them to do. So, all right, regional stuff, Diggs. What did you have in mind with this?
So, because of the Dark Thorn Academy novels that I'm reading, I was thinking this weekend about cooking and just again how different a node can be based on racial government and how that affects the area that they're in. So it seems to me that a Dunir would be a Dunir population, even if it's in the exact same node, that they would plant different plants and maybe bring in different beasts, and that would change the local environment some way, and that should affect cooking such that they're bringing in their own recipes, and that's going to be dependent upon the gardens that Dunir like versus the gardens that Nakua like. One of the things that kind of bugged me about New World is if I wanted to make barley soup, I couldn't make barley soup from all the ingredients that's in the region where I'm farming barley. I have to run across the world to try and find carrots, or across the world to try and find salt. And it seems like if I'm a Dunir and I want to make Dunir pot pie, that I should have the kind of vegetables that I want to be in that pie locally. There might also be some regional plants and stuff that it doesn't matter which population is there, it's just there by region. But that should also affect the recipes that are available and all of that. And then that had me thinking about possible set type bonuses, so that if you have Dunir ingredients plus Dunir cooking utensils or cooking tools plus a Dunir recipe, maybe that gives you a bonus for your Dunir pot pie that comes out at the end. Someone was mentioning on the forums salt mines, and that had me thinking, well, Dunir might, if it's mines, Dunir might be finding salt in mines, and so maybe they're more likely to have salted foods, or foods salted with salt taken from mines, whereas Nakua might be more interested in foods with fish, since they are seafaring people. And so it just had me thinking about that, how, the racial population in a region should provide us with particular recipes that go along with that race, instead of, again, having to travel all over the world to do that. So I'm hoping that we see that these racial populations affect what actually appears in what resources appear in that region, because maybe they bring them with them or whatever. It's a cultural thing. So that's also another way that servers could change, regions would change, all that stuff,
Yeah, and that's the sort of thing that I wonder how they would deal with, like the cultivation of, you've got a tier 3, these are the people that are dominant in the region. At tier 4, it kind of shifts to this. Tier 5, it kind of shifts to this. Tier 6 kind of shifts to this. And along the way, how each of the different peoples would affect the vegetation and affect what, how the land is managed. Pyre, for example, I would imagine would be like, you know what? You're not logging anymore. Just tell the trees and they'll give you wood.
Mm-hmm.
That's what we do.
Mm-hmm.
No cutting down trees anymore.
No,
Yeah, and how would that affect the resources? Like, even chopped wood versus asked for wood. Like, would those have different properties? That's just fascinating to me. Huh?
Well, it would fit in perfectly with what's it called, bulletin boards, right? Which are regional sort of. They don't, not auction houses, but things like a market. Being able to go to a new area, see what's available, go to the stalls. That would be really interesting to see that tied into the race of the node as it changes, as you say. Just again, I wonder how difficult that would be to just implement.
Yeah.
In a sort of gathering resource way.
Yeah.
But as Neuro says, we're not supposed to know how they do that. We're just supposed to know that over here, which libraries also will tell you, right? Libraries will allow you to know where your resources are. So that would be interesting. Are there differences in a library from one race to the other? Like, are you actually going to see some differences in how things function, not just the architecture?
Exactly.
So like a Dunir almanac would be different than a Kalar almanac, that they would have different things, different seasonal stuff, different focus on certain constellations as landmarks or other things like that. Yeah, I could see that.
You know, the bulletin boards really can. I'm curious because there's also job postings, and some of the things that they've said we'll be able to do on these regional bulletin boards is kind of curious. So there was dungeon delving. So I don't know if that means I could ask you to go to a dungeon for me. Quests. So again, I don't know if I get a quest to go kill 10 rats, can I just give that to you and like I share part of the profit with you? Gathering, that makes sense. Go get me some iron or something like that. But then there was also a mention of story arcs in the wiki. I don't know, like how does that even tie? I'm really curious to know more.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
quest sponsorship. What does that even mean? Like, there's also like I don't know. I don't understand.
I wonder if that's one of those scribe things.
Well, I want to be a scribe because it also says you can do it from your point of view. So we'll make it as skewed as possible. So that also, again, makes me wonder, like, are libraries going to be skewed in the viewpoint of who's, like, is that server history actually going to be... So do you, in effect, have two different resources, right? So as a new player, you go in and you actually just see the true facts of what has happened and when, but then you go visit the library and there's an accounting that's, you know, maybe slightly different or just complete lies as to what occurred to get to that state. That would be kind of fun to compare as well.
Or throwing in your own biases, like those stinky, ugly Empyreans.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, it specifically says from the scribe's point of view. So I'm assuming they would let us, you know, if you qualify as a scribe, you're allowed to just document what you want. I would write that I'm the king, and just leave it at that.
There you go. Which would especially be nice for, I think Nagish is a guy in the forums who's a lich, actually, and wanting to be the worshipped as a god. And I'm like, well, I mean, if you can get a following, technically you can be worshipped by people as a god, and if you're the one writing the history, I guess you can write the history with your...
Are you talking about in real life or in the game?
There's a guy on forums, Nagish, who his RP is that he's a lich.
Okay, that helps establish whether he's trying to get a following inside the game or outside of the game.
Yes.
Two very different things.
Yes.
Like that's where you need my help if it's right. Like we got some shit to talk about. So.
Yes. So yeah, it's one of those things. Like again, I think you've said that you'd like to be an atheist in the game, and that's kind of within the game. That's kind of crazy because gods are actually walking around. So I don't know how you can believe that they don't exist. You could choose not to worship any, but believing that they don't exist is kind of strange when they're right there. But you have the opposite.
But why are they gods? They can, because they were akin to essence, like what makes them. Aren't the ancients gods?
They're the ancients, and they're the 10, and
But aren't
then
they
broke
were imbued
up,
with
and
all
that's
10
why-
gods? They manipulate the essence they were taught. So are they not
Maybe
also
they're-
gods?
Demigods.
I'm
Maybe.
just saying. Like, how do
Yeah.
you define the god aspect? How
Yeah.
do you define that?
There's probably some measure for it, but well, just as in Greek religion, there are gods and there's titans and there's demigods, right? So, but the opposite is also true. Then if you're role playing as a god and you have a following, I mean, maybe you can be a god if you want to.
You can manipulate magic. You can't die. You come back every time.
Right? You're immortal, right? So,
I mean, who defines what a god is?
we'll see when we're playing the game, and that's kind of the fun part of RP.
Yeah. Which takes me actually to, I'm just really curious. I wish I had, it's one of those things where you're reading and it's like, man, I wish I personally knew Steven and was able to play Pathfinder with him 10 years ago, just so that I know. Like, it makes me wonder, like, has he reached out to to people and said, hey, you can't talk about the game that we play? Like, how do you keep that under wraps? Like, how many people was in his group? There's just a lot of things that you start, it's like, that's either inconsistent or we're just missing huge chunks of information.
Could be both.
Yeah, or both. But that brings me to sort of, since we're talking about gods, this thought. I was again reading through lore, and of course, the goddess of creation is sort of a central aspect to Ashes of Creation. The phoenix, I think, is her avatar, right? And she is sort of what gives your character the spark of life to enter into the world. So there's a little bit more about the goddess of creation than some of the other gods and goddesses. So actually, I was reading more for the story arcs, and I started kind of hitting on different quotes from Stephen and Jeffrey before he left. I was like, huh. And then I thought about what Stephen, in April during that live stream sort of caught himself saying. So here is sort of my theory on the goddess of creation. So in reading through all this, I believe the goddess of creation actually sacrificed herself to save the Tolnar and to allow all the four races to escape through the divine gateways. So why do I think this? Well, we know that the goddess of fate told the goddess of creation, and only her, that the ancients and the others would one day return. Stephen had said that. We also know that the goddess of creation then created Sanctus and the divine gateways in preparation for when that day would arrive. Well, when the day did arrive, we also know that it was very disorderly, right? People did not escape very easily. In fact, there's a nice story on the Order of the Steel Bloom that talks about the Alar and trying to get the people to safety, and how that entire order died in trying to do this. And then there's Apocalypse, right? So the entire lore of that game was that we were trying to get through these divine gateways, and we fell backwards, and now we were fighting to try to find a place where we could fight the ancients and the corruption. So then we start reading. Well, we're also told that the goddess of creation used, quote, divine intervention to save the races. And Stephen also mentions at one point that the quote was, her sacrifice protected the people of Vera during the apocalypse. So, okay, well, what did she sacrifice? Well, possibly her own life. And lastly, during April's live stream, Stephen was asked a question about the Tolnar, and he begins talking. He gives the answer, and he sort of stops short of a full answer, but he says, well, the Tolnar were protected. And then he kind of catches himself and says, oh, well, I can't go into that, and just completely shuts down. So, okay, well, how were they protected? Who protected them? So I actually think that all of this ties into the story arc that we're going to experience this very beginning, is that the goddess of creation actually sacrificed herself for the Tolnar and for the four races. And so we're being brought back into the world that I actually think the goddess of creation is also still not there. That's part of the story arc, is possibly trying to bring her back. And Jeffrey had mentioned that avatar of the goddess of creation, the phoenix, is a direct reference to a very important plot point of the first phase of the storyline. So I don't think I've seen it mentioned anywhere, but I'm pretty certain that based off all of this, that is sort of going to be the lore that we are presented with, that she actually sacrificed herself for the people in order to get as many as she could to the safety of Sanctus.
Yeah, that could be really cool, because we have to, I think the ancients occupy the castles when the players first return, and we have to kick the ancients out of the castles before we can take them over. So it's going to take us a while to be powerful enough to do that. I don't know what a while means, but it's not supposed to be an easy quest kicking the agent, or easy siege kicking the ancients out. And so that brings us again to, if that's the case, that we're supposedly trying to bring the goddess of creation back. What if we don't? Some of us don't want to do that. That could be fun to play.
And
how much of a choice do we have to do that? How much of a possibility do we have to prevent that?
The only argument I found against this in the wiki was the discussion of, well, what is your character when they arrive, that they have this sort of essence of the goddess of creation, that this spark of life is in them. So but they never directly say that the goddess of life actually puts you in the world, that you're just sort of a part of the essence of her, and that's part of what makes your soul and your life force, essentially. But I think you could still have the plot point that, since it's essentially just essence, that your characters are still, and I guess technically they're already alive, right? They're living in Sanctus, so it's not like you're born anew.
Yeah, the gods reopen the portals, but I don't remember if they say the goddess of creation.
They don't. I've looked a lot, and actually that brought up another very interesting question that maybe we can talk about when we do another lore discussion. But it's exactly that. Like, we're told we have the great Exodus, and everyone goes through the portals or the Tolnar stay, and then we're brought back. And my question last week was like, okay, well, what brings us back? Like, why are we all moved? The 4 races, the 4 gateways, like what tells us to go back? But also, I didn't think about this at the time. When there was the mass exodus, it's because the Harbingers brought the ancients. So we know that corruption spread. So who took care of the corruption? Who on Vera cleaned up enough corruption and ancients to where we could then come back? Like, we don't know that either. Because was it the gods?
Yeah.
We don't know. But it's still there. So
yeah.
So what transpired to, oh my gosh, there's so much of this, we can't live here anymore, to, oh, well, there's enough gone that we can come back?
Well, the gods make that decision and reopen the portals, and we go through the portals because they're open, and now we can explore that. So I'm sure there's plenty who are not adventurers who choose to stay on Sanctus. Those of us who are curious enough to find out what was going on or what we can do to make a life for ourselves on Vera go through the portals, basically because they're open and we can do it.
Unless they haven't revealed that Sanctus is going to collapse and everybody needs to get out of there or something. They haven't said anything of the sort, but that doesn't mean it couldn't be the case. That would sure be a kick in the rear to get you out of there. Hey, this dimension's closing, and
it's a whole nother
get
world, right? So that's the other. I just want to know more of the lore, because why did the goddess of fate only tell the goddess of creation?
Hey, who's the god of destruction? And
why did she not tell anyone else? But she went ahead and made all of these plans, put them in place for when and if this happened. It's just. So does that then tie into her death? Like, the gods are upset, so they don't come to help her, and so she gives herself as a way to get. That doesn't make a whole lot of sense in my head. But I've also been trying to think of, okay, why is it specifically mentioned that the goddess of creation was the only one told, and they didn't tell anyone else?
Maybe the goddess of fate likes snitching everybody's business on everyone else and just knowing that she's the only one that knows who knows what. No, we don't know the personalities of these gods very well.
Yeah.
And when you have a pantheon of gods, it's always important to have them be fallible jerks.
At least some of them.
At least some of them.
And since I touched on the Tolnar, here's another thing to talk about sometime when we have more time. They never left Varus, so they have always had access to magic. So why do we know?
Tolnar?
Yes,
But they've been contained this entire time.
but they've still had
And
access to magic.
Yeah.
Maybe, but
Yeah. But so I guess we have to find out where you're going. So they had access to magic, and
Well, we're coming back from Sanctus and we know nothing, right? We're being taught, and I sent you that story where there's an alchemist that's getting taught some things by the Tolnar that's present. But why do we, like, as long as we're on good terms, the Tolnar should know everything there is about magic and essence and all of that, right? Because they had magic pre-Exodus.
yeah,
maybe, unless the area where they're protected was some sort of anti-magic zone where they couldn't continue practicing, and
Well-
they have the books, but they don't have the means.
Well, here's the other thought too, to tie that into this goddess of creation theory, is what if when she protected them, it was an expenditure of all of her essence, and it sort of created a bubble that then took took most of that essence away as sort of that would be an easy way to sort of solve that issue. But I mean, if
I'm still not sure what the issue is. What's the issue?
well, if you want to take it in a literal sense, if I decide to play a Tolnar, I should know magic to begin with. There should be no relearning of magic.
You should know magic. That doesn't necessarily mean
character
you know
coming
all
f-
magic.
Well, I would have had thousands and thousands of years on Vera with
Yep.
You
access.
haven't been alive
but
for
then
thousands.
likewise-
People would have.
Likewise, the people coming back from Sanctus, thousands and thousands of years without access to magic, the best they could do was, like, recite to the best of their knowledge and understanding a bunch of things on a piece of paper and some gestures that at some point in their people's history back on the old world used to result in magic, but here it doesn't. I think there's going to be more to the intro than we've seen in Alpha 1, that it isn't going to be presented as, oh, you just came through the portal and you know how to do magic, but that you came through the portal and there were some people that went out into the world first while other people stayed behind and learned things and were, accommodated with new whatever that they have to kind of like learn and develop. And then day one of the game actually starting is after people have been in Vera from Sanctus for like a decade.
Because then also, did the Tolnar get, like, how did they know to leave the underground? Like, were they told by the gods at the same time that the portal's open?
Yeah. Probably the bubble pop is like,
because
time to go.
Because it wasn't safe for them to leave the underrealm because corruption was rampant.
If I were the Tolnar, I would just say, I already know magic. I'm going to use it on you all. You need to get the F out.
That's like saying, how do you already know? I mean, just because physics has been around for
because it's specifically mentioned in the lore that millennia took place on Sanctus to where they forgot legend. Fact became legend, became myth. They forgot magic. They forgot essence. All I'm saying is that during those millennia, unless told otherwise, the Tolnar were still on Vera, where they would have still had access to magic.
Just because we have physics, and physics has been around for 100 years, doesn't mean that everybody can just do physics when they're born. You still have to study and learn physics if you're going to focus on that. Doesn't mean that you just have all knowledge by osmosis. Different languages have been around for hundreds of thousands of years. It doesn't mean that I can just start speaking Swahili just because Swahili has existed here.
Here, I'll give you one of my brother's favorite examples. Just because you don't know everything there is to know about digestion doesn't mean you still won't digest food when you eat it. I get what you're saying, that the Tolnar have, unless somehow forbidden or otherwise, have no specific reason, if they're still in the place where magic exists, to have lost access to magic. There will have to be some part of that, Deus Ex Machina in the lore or whatever, to which, I hope they're going to reveal some Tolnar lore. That was one of the big Kickstarter things, if I'm not mistaken, and I think people were really excited for it. So, hopefully we'll get some inkling of what they're about sometime soon. But who knows?
Now, I would almost bet money just based off of how he started that they were protected underground. That, if I'm correct, that somehow through the act of self-sacrifice that just sort of removed. They're basically in a bubble, right? Protected in a bubble.
Yeah.
They are from corruption, but there's probably a significant enough amount of magic that they were able to merge into a conglomerate of species.
Well, you can spin it several ways. I mean, corruption is essence, right? So if you're protected from corruption, you could also say, well, then you're protected from magical essence as well. But I don't know.
But again,
I don't know the lore.
I think quite a bit of magic went into all those species going together.
Yeah. I mean, we're probably going to find out at some point. It's probably not going to be anytime soon. Maybe not even this year. They probably don't even need to talk about the Tolnar until they're ready to show us an alpha or beta with the Underrealm in it.
Steven needs to watch this and then send me a DM. I promise I won't tell.
Mm-hmm.
Just I promise. You can take away my Braver of Worlds. No, you can't.
That would be pay to win.
Well, we are at the end of our time. So thank you, everyone, for coming out and spending the evening with us. And we will be back next week. Actually, yeah, there's the live stream. It's Friday, right?
Yeah.
So hopefully we'll be able to talk a little bit about that, which I actually did post some questions. This is the first time I've ever done that. What did I post? Who are the
Just got to be one question.
Well, I put 3. They can pick which one.
Yeah, I guess so.
I don't think they'll answer any of them because they're all lore questions. But I thought I'd ask. So one was, the Tauren parent races. Who are they?
I asked that one too.
Gosh, I'm trying to think of what the others were. Anyways, they were off of our lore discussion. Oh, what planet were the ancients on before?
Vera.
Yeah. So we'll see. All right. Yep. Well, everyone have a good week. Yeah.
Yep.
We'll see you next Sunday.
See you then. See you in chat over there, and I'll probably write some notes in the Discord. Later.
See ya.